Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for showing up on screen for our Quabbin winter program series that we do on Sundays in the winter. So we get speakers sometimes from outside agencies, but today we have a nice treat. It's actually a couple of our own DCR, water supply protection, aquatic biologists here to talk all about aquatic invasive plants. So with that, Shasten will start the show, and then Tayelor will sort of end it, take over halfway through. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Hello, everybody, and happy Sunday. Thank you for spending this time with us. And I am Shasten Sherwell, and my colleague Tayelor Gosselin is here too. And we are there, as Justin said, we're the aquatic biologists here for the Quabbin Reservoir and for the Quabbin and Ware River watersheds. And we're here to talk about aquatic invasive species. So let's start. Okay, so we're going to start with talking about what is an aquatic invasive species, how are they introduced, the impacts that they can have, which are present in the Quabbin and Ware River watersheds, and which are potential. And then Taylor's going to walk you through our management program, and then we'll have time to answer any questions that you have. So what is an aquatic invasive species? Sometimes you will hear us say AIS, and that's just short for aquatic invasive species. And for it to be an aquatic invasive species, it has to be partially or fully aquatic, so something fully submerged, like this picture of hydrilla, or something like Phragmites, that the roots are underwater, but other part of the plant are outside of the water. It has to be non-native, sometimes called exotic, non-indigenous, or alien. So these are species that are coming from Europe, Asia, South America, Africa, anywhere else, including other regions within the US. So if a species is coming in from, let's say, Texas or something like that, we would still consider that non-native. Now, not all non-natives are invasive, because some non-native species are beneficial. Examples of this are species that are used for biological control, such as the arundo wasp right here in this picture. This is being used in California and in Texas to control the giant reed. So it's originally from Spain and from France, but because it's a beneficial species, and even though it's non-native, it's not considered invasive. Other species that are non-native but not considered invasive are species that are being reintroduced to an area. For example, the wolves in Yellowstone that are being brought in from Canada. There are native species that are somewhat problematic, and these are called nuisance species. And examples of this are the white water lily or pondweed. The third criteria for it to be considered an aquatic invasive species is that it has to be able to reproduce and outcompete native species. And lastly, it has to have an overall negative impact on native species, the environment, or it can cause harm to humans. So this is a simplified version. It has to be non-native, it can reproduce, and because it can reproduce, it can outcompete native species, and then it has negative impacts. So that's what we call an invasive species. There's different pathways of introduction. Some are related to human activity, some are non-related to human activity. For aquatic invasive species, a big one is ballast water. So these are organisms that are transported in the ballast water of cruise ships, cargo ships, even smaller boats. And then when the ballast water is, they transport it to another water body and the ballast water is drained, then they're introducing this other non-native species. Another way is hitchhikers on boats and equipment and live bait. also agriculture, aquaculture, and horticulture. Aquaculture includes aquariums, and many of the aquatic invasive species in the US have been spread through the accidental or deliberate release of aquariums and species in aquariums. And then non-human activity includes transport by wildlife and migration adaptation to climate change. So climate change is helping invasive species spread more easily. And there are many factors on why this is happening, but two that I'm going to talk about are the temperature range that species thrive in. So every region has a specific temperature range. And with climate change, those temperature ranges are shifting, making it easier for species that are not from that region to be able to thrive in there. Another reason is that climate change is extending growing seasons in many regions, and that makes it easier for non-native species to thrive. So aquatic invasive species can have ecological, recreational, or economic impact. Ecological impacts include decreasing water quality and clarity. They can promote harmful algal blooms. They can decrease oxygen in the water column, and that creates dead zones, which then affects fish and invertebrates. They can make changes to fish and wildlife habitats. And because they outcompete native species, they decrease biodiversity, and that leads to a loss of beneficial native species. They can restrict or alter water flow, and then they can disrupt food webs. We have an example here on the right where we have two different ecosystems. One is dominated by Eurasian milfoil, and the other one has a diverse native community. The diverse native species support an array of invertebrates, which in turn support more food for higher trophic levels. While in an environment that is dominated by Eurasian milfoil, this does not support a lot of invertebrate diversity, and that ends up decreasing food availability for higher trophic levels. Some of the recreational impacts are related to a reduction in fishing opportunities due to stressed fishing communities, just as I described above, by the disruption of the food web, and physical interference with recreational activities, such as swimming through dense mats or paddling or boating, and then fouling and clogging of gear. And then economic impacts include damaged infrastructure, so they can damage canals, intakes, pipes, etc. And it's been shown that decreasing water quality has an impact in waterfront property values. And then lastly, the cost of managing AIS is very high. So once you have aquatic invasive species in a water body, it's very expensive and difficult to remove them or manage them. Here are some of the present aquatic invasive species that we have in the reservoir or in the watersheds. So one is variable leaf milfoil. This is present in the reservoir, in the holding ponds, and throughout Quabbin and Ware River watersheds. Fanwort, it is not present in the reservoir, but it's present in 2 ponds that are close to the reservoir and in 4 ponds that are in the Ware River watershed. These 2 species can decrease dissolved oxygen in the water column, affecting fishes and invertebrates. Phragmites is present extensively throughout the reservoir, and it's present in the holding ponds and throughout the Quabbin and Ware River watershed. And then we have purple loosestrife. This plant is present in the reservoir, in the boat launch areas, and in the holding ponds, and it's present extensively throughout the Quabbin and Ware River watersheds. These 2 species can alter the habitat and the landscape. Here are some of the potential aquatic invasive species that we are concerned that could come into the reservoir or into the watersheds. First are the spiny water flea and the fishhook water flea. These are zooplankton, and they are related to Daphnia, which is another type of water flea that is commonly seen and that is native. The big difference between these two and Daphnia is this long tail that they have that makes it impossible for any fish to eat them. So they don't have any predators. So there is no control for this species. They were introduced to the Great Lakes via ballast water. They're native to Europe and Asia, and they decimate native zooplankton populations because they eat a lot of the smaller zooplankton, and then they compete with smaller fish for food. So because of this, they decrease food source for fish, and as they decrease zooplankton populations, that also leads to an increase in algal blooms. They can also be a nuisance by clogging fishing lines and other equipment while fishing or recreating. And they can also clog gills of native fish. And the big problem with this too is that it only takes one to start populating the water body, because they can reproduce asexually, so they clone themselves in the spring and the summer, and they also have dormant eggs that can withstand the winter. They are present in New York, in New Hampshire, and in Vermont. They have not been seen in Massachusetts yet, but we are on the lookout for those. This is a picture of how big they are. That looks small to us, but for a zooplankton, that is actually pretty big. Another potential aquatic invasive species that we are concerned about and we're on the lookout for is hydrilla. It was introduced via the aquarium trade. It is native to Southeast Asia, and it can create dense mats at the water surface. And then this can restrict native vegetation, recreation, and water flow. It only takes one fragment. It produces turions and tubers. It develops seeds, and it can survive up to 40 feet in depth. It is present in Massachusetts. It's been observed all throughout the Connecticut River. And in this map, you can see all the different places where it's also been observed. So these blue dots represent, the different colors of the dots represent density, but everywhere where there's a dot, that's an observation of hydrilla. So this is the Connecticut River. That's where it's been seen a lot, but it's also been seen throughout many different places in Massachusetts. And with that, I will stop sharing and hand it over to Taylor.
All right, let's get this one. All right, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to walk you through DCR's AIS management program. There are 4 main techniques that we employ here at Quabbin, and that is exclusion and prevention, monitoring, management, and education. Although all 4 are necessary for an effective management program, many agencies focus on exclusion and prevention as it's the most effective method for AIS control and requires the least amount of funding and time. To go more into detail about exclusion and prevention, exclusion includes regulations and actions that block or restrict access to vulnerable areas. Here at Quabbin, we've established limiting fishing areas and installed fragment barriers to block plant access into the reservoir. Prevention, on the other hand, only reduces the risk of AIS introduction. Our decontamination programs fall under this category and include our boat seal and self-certification programs. The boat seal program ensures that private boaters have participated in our decontamination events and have not launched their boats on other possibly infested waters before launching at Quabbin. So 2 different decontamination programs that we have are the warm weather decontamination and cold weather quarantine. The warm weather decontamination includes spraying hot water that's above 140 degrees Fahrenheit across all surfaces and equipment that come in contact with the water. This includes flushing the motor, the live wells, trailer, and wheel wells. And usually, as long as that water is in contact with a specific area of the boat for over 5 seconds, anything that is present there is no longer viable and cannot be transferred to another water body. Cold weather quarantine, on the other hand, is our winter decontamination. So once fishermen are done for the season, they can participate in this quarantine where we will check over the boat, see if there's any fragments or make sure it's clean. We'll tag the boat, and then the cold temperatures and long dry periods will ensure that if there was anything that we missed, they're no longer viable by the next fishing season. In addition to those 2 decontamination programs, we have our self-certification programs at Long Pond and Asnacomet Pond. Self-certification is basically just another method to ensure or to encourage compliance and spread awareness about AIS. At specific water bodies, like the 2 that I just mentioned, boaters fill out our self-certification forms, which state the last launch site and that the boat or canoe or kayak is clean. They then display this on their vehicle's dashboard prior to launching. And this is just a way for us to see where boaters are coming from, if there's any potential infestations that we need to be on the lookout for. And like I mentioned before, it just helps spread awareness regarding AIS, and hopefully people will be more likely to check their equipment before launching in any new water body. So for a monitoring program, we do this with littoral zone surveys. And what I mean by, in case you guys don't know, the littoral zone is the shallow area of a water body, which is right in this area here, which is also called the photic zone. And that just means that sunlight is able to reach the bottom of the water column. And because of this, it's an area where a lot of plants like to grow. And where there's a lot of plants growing, there's the potential for AIS to grow as well, which is why we focus a lot of our efforts in that zone. So at Quabbin, annually we have 14 surveys that we conduct, and that includes on the Quabbin Reservoir, the boat launch areas 1, 2, and 3, and our holding ponds, O'Loughlin and Pottapog. We have 9 additional ponds that we survey throughout the Quabbin and Ware River watershed. And these are areas where there's high boating activity, lots of fishing. They might be like heavily developed shorelines. So just ponds that are more likely to have introduction occur. So we try to monitor those regularly to see if there's anything new coming into our watersheds. We also do additional ponds within our environmental quality assessment basins as we can. And what I mean by our EQA basins is basically our watersheds are broken up into these little sub basins. And that's just to allow us more time to cover this area, because we only have so much time and so many staff that can cover all of our acreage. So these districts are just allowing us to focus on one area every year on a rotating schedule. And we try to match our survey ponds to that. So the way that we conduct our zone surveys are rake tosses, which is basically using this double-sided rake head attached to this long rope that we then toss over the side of the boat, and hopefully the rope is long enough and we'll get to the bottom of the water column. And then we just drag it along the bottom of the water, collecting weeds as we can, and drag that up into the boat where we can then identify some of those low growing aquatic plants. Let's see. So we also take GPS points, and those allow us to then create these maps of where AIS are, where natives are, and see if there's any movement year to year, or start to see patterns, if there's anything new that wasn't previously there, and so on. You can see that this is a map that I created last year of Lake Mattawa. It was mostly milfoil. There was a few spots where we think maybe it was Phragmites. Unfortunately, as is the nature with plant surveys, sometimes in different growing stages, like a really young Phragmites could also be just a really young native species. So this allows us to go back to these areas where we need to revisit and double check our ID year after year to make sure that it is something that is an issue, or double check the size of an area and make sure that's not becoming an issue in the future. We also do hand grabs. It's just the nature of the job. Plants could be very, like I said, they're very hard to identify. So it could just be a leaf is, like the venation is either parallel or it could be alternate. And that could be the differentiating factor between a native species or an invasive. So a lot of times we do have to take a really close look at these plants, and we utilize these little loops, which is a small magnifying glass, to take a closer look at these plants and their characteristics. And then we also take a lot of pictures. So when I'm out there, I usually take a picture of the conditions of the boat launch area, if there is one. Make sure everything is clean, if people are able to access it, there's no issues that we need to address. I'll take an overall picture of just how the day was. Usually it's a nice, beautiful day like this, but it could also be really cloudy, and sometimes that affects how far down in the water column you could actually see these plants. I'll take pictures of any erosion issues, if there are any. And then I like to take pictures of plants that give me a good, take good identification photos. So this one is a fanwort. And you can see its nice long branches, you can see its opposite leaves, and then you can actually see the inflorescence of flowers as well. So that's a really good picture to help people identify fanwort if they ever had questions on if the plant that they were looking at was a fanwort or not. And then because I'm looking at plants and I'm taking pictures, there's a lot of other plant pictures. So another type of survey that we do are our zooplankton tows. And so this is usually looking for the spiny water flea that we were talking about. So in order to do this, we utilize this specialized net. It's a very fine mesh, which allows us to filter a lot of water through and concentrate our samples into this little basket, I could say, at the bottom. So this means that we can survey a wide area, but only have to look through a very small sample to see what we have. So in that sample, we'll do a scan and quickly see if there's any water fleas or other invasive zooplankton, and continue on. And so those surveys are done only in the Quabbin Reservoir. We don't do those in other water bodies. So management. We hope that when we have a new species or a new plant of concern, that we'll be able to act really quickly and take care of it, no problem. Unfortunately, we do have a fairly lengthy process in order to make sure that we're being thorough. And so these are the steps regarding that. The first one is always detection. Do we have something? Is it something of concern? And that could be from our aquatic biologists, it could be from other DCR employees, or it could even be the public bringing it up to our attention and asking us to take a look at it. Once we have that detection, we'll go into confirming the ID. If an aquatic biologist from DCR was the first one to do the detection, we'll try and find a secondary individual, usually like an aquatic biologist from Wachusett, to conduct the identification. But we do need to have that secondary opinion to make sure that we're not becoming biased and it is in fact an invasive. Once that's done, we notify appropriate individuals at DCR and NWRA. And then we go into delineation where Shasten and I at Quabbin, or any DCR biologist, will conduct extensive surveys to quantify and define the infestation. So where they are, how dense are they? Is it just one or two? Is it a large area that's covered? What are we actually dealing with here? So once we have that information, then based on the biology of the plant, so with Phragmites, they create very dense stands and they are emergent species, so they're not fully in the water column. So the management plan for Phragmites is going to be vastly different from a management plan for a fully aquatic species, such as milfoil, that's fully in the water column and can easily be spread by fragmentation. So based on the plant's biological characteristics, that will determine what tools are available and what we can really plan for going forward. Once those suggestions are made, then we decide what the plan is and take action. So that could be bringing in contractors to remove it. It could be that we just keep an eye on it and have our aquatic biologists try and manage it as, like, year after year as we can, whatever. Once that action is taken, then the DCR biologist will go back and evaluate, was it effective, was it not, what do we need to change or alter, and that will affect our future actions. And once we get into these last two, there's a lot of back and forth. You make a decision, take an action, you evaluate, and you just go back until either it's taken care of or then you have a management plan for like a 5-year period for the AIS management in the future. So a couple of management activities that we have here at Quabbin are the Shaft 8 drawdown along the Ware River. And this one is an annual management program where we expose the plants to the environment. You can kind of see in this 4 series picture here. So here's the water channel, and you can see that the water used to be in this area, but with the drawdown, the water has receded and exposed all of these plants along the lake bed. And so this allows our contractors to go in and kind of rake through and collect a lot of these plant matter and reduce the possibility of fragmentation and all those fragments being carried down, because this one is focused on milfoil, which is known to fragment. So that is our annual management plan regarding milfoil at the Shaft 8 along the Ware River. But another method that we could use if the water was deep enough and if the area was large enough is DASH, which is diver-assisted suction harvesting. And basically this diver will go in with this long hose and feed plant material into the hose, and it suctions it up into collection bags that then they dispose of at the end of the day. Now this one is not very selective, so there might be some bycatch of native plants, but it is fairly minimal, and this does help reduce the amount of fragmentation that occurs. In areas where it's not deep enough to do suction harvesting, you might be relegated to just doing hand pulling, which is just via boats or canoe or kayak, picking up a plant by hand and throwing it into a bucket or a bag for collection that way. That one is more time consuming, and you do cover less area, but in areas where it is shallow, you can usually grab a lot of material in a short amount of time, especially where it's very dense. So depending on the characteristics of your site and the characteristics of the plant could determine which management method you use. Now, there are herbicides and algicides that are available for use for these AIS, but as a drinking water reservoir, it is our policy that we won't be using those on our waters, but they are available for other areas. So another part of our management is education. So pretty much what we're doing right here. It can include our signage and brochures. If you ever participated in our decon events, you've seen this brochure right here, Spiding Water Fleet, the nice blue brochure. We are working on having other AIS brochures available at the visitor center. So if you're ever interested in, those should be coming out soon, at least by the time that the boat launch areas are open. If you've ever visited, I think this is Long Pond or any of our other ponds, you may have seen our nice little kiosks or signages here that usually tell you the rules and regulations of the pond. And then there's usually also this nice stop aquatic hitchhikers or some kind of signage telling you about aquatic invasives. So we try to utilize these as much as we can to spread the word about invasives, let people know what they are, why they're important to stop, and why we should care. We try to make this as relevant as we can, try to make it easy and interesting to read, because I know that we have a lot of jargon that we use and it may not always be easy to understand. We also do presentations like this one, and we try to hold conversations with boaters at our decon events whenever possible to understand, are there any concerns that people have? Have they noticed different things happening with the water body? Is it weedier this year than it was last year? Were there a lot of mystery snails this year? Conversations help us understand areas where we're not able to get to all the time. So those are really important. Also, just to explain to people what our job is and why we care once again. And it includes presentations as we can. And basically our motto is to spread the word, not the weed. And hopefully that'll work. So like I just said, if there's anything that you take away from this presentation, is to clean, drain, and dry. So first of all, inspect your boat, trailer, fishing gear. Try and make sure that there's nothing just hanging off, that there's not a lot of dirt stuck to all of your gear. Drain any standing water, so your bilge, your live well. If you have a bait bucket, dump it not into the water, but on shore, on higher ground. That way we can prevent any bait becoming invasive in the water body, because that can be known to happen. It has happened, so please make sure that your bait bucket is not dumped directly into the water. Make sure that you're wiping your fishing lines and reels, the live wells and bait bucket, especially your fishing lines in areas where you know that there's spiny water flea. As you can see, there's like, they just kind of hang on right there. So usually something that's kind of like a nice cardboard or like a wet rag really along your line, just to try and get them off would be fine. And then we try to say at minimum, like, let 5 days of complete dryness. That will usually kill most, if not all. We do understand sometimes for you avid fishermen, that's not always possible. So maybe even just having a secondary set of equipment that you bring to certain areas, or a specific set just for quabbin. That way you can switch out as you need to and allow that 5 days of complete dryness. Another thing I want to point out here is if you have carpeted bunks, that 5 days does not really apply to that because it does retain a lot of moisture. So if you are able to get those carpeted bunks just completely in the sun for all those 5 days, that would be great, and that should take care of most of the moisture. But carpeted bunks are a big means of transportation between water bodies. So just keep that in mind. And I think that was my last slide. So I think we're going to questions. Is that right, Justin?
Yeah, I believe so. And I saw one question in the Q&A that it says hitchhikers were mentioned as a potential channel for spread for human activity. Could you explain that, what you mean by that? And yeah, sorry for not explaining that very well, but it's just goes to what Tayelor just said about cleaning your gear, your fishing lines, and pretty much all of your equipment, because many of the invasive species, including spiny water flea and fishhook water flea can just hang on to things like fishing lines or even just parts of your boat. And then you go into another water body, and that's how they get introduced. That can also happen with plants. It's not only for zooplankton. Fragments of plants can stay on parts of your boat or your equipment, kayaks, canoes, and then you go to a new water body, and then that's being introduced. So that's what we mean by hitchhikers.
Looks like another one just popped in, Shasten. This one might be for you. So for big ship ballast water, why do they empty it at all? Can't the ballast water stay in the ship for the return journey?
They do it. The ballast water is used to kind of like provide balance. So like when they have different weight in the cargo, they do that a lot with the ballast water. I'm sure there's other reasons. That's the one that I know of. So yeah, that would be, I'm not used to being in boats that big. But,
yeah, I think from what I know, yeah, it's mostly for the weight, because if they go across the sea with a lot of cargo, it's going to be fairly heavy, and so they want more buoyancy. And then, like on the return trip, if it's lighter, or if they are carrying something different, then they need to kind of even that out, and that's why they fill it up or they discharge or what have you. But I'm not a ship expert, so I can't say for sure.
Yeah, it's just something that happens often. Cargo ships, cruises, they just have ballast water is always being exchanged. So there's now, because a lot of species have been introduced that way, now there's a lot of ways, and there's new ways of treating ballast water, but we're not experts in that at all. We're just talking mainly about a path of introduction. I believe there's another one.
Yeah, so how do plants such as milfoil decrease oxygen? I thought they made oxygen. So I'm pretty sure, so yeah, they do create oxygen, but when plants start creating a very dense mat, as they degrade, they actually, I think it's like they release carbon, or
they
yeah.
trigger a lot more of bacteria activity.
Yeah.
So there's more respiration than production. So that increases carbon dioxide, decreases oxygen, and that's what creates sort of kind of like a dead zone. So it creates like a low oxygen zone.
Right. Yeah, they are also really, because it is so dense, they also increase temperature. And yeah, different species can affect like the carbon loading as well, and affect how phosphorus is leached into the water column. And there's a whole science to how plants affect the water chemistry. Here's another one for you, Shasten. Do water fleas have native predators in Europe? Can they be introduced here?
Yeah, that is a tricky way of managing. It would be some sort of biocontrol, but once you start adding more species, and that's been shown in many other places, then that other species gets out of control. So as of right now, I haven't heard of any intention or any studies that are thinking of introducing native predators of spiny water flea or the fishhook water flea. And off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you which are the predators for those two species. And so I haven't heard anything. I just know that that is always sort of like a risky scenario for dealing with an invasive species. In few scenarios it works, like the Arondo wasp that that I discussed in the beginning, that is a successful biocontrol, but most often managing an invasive species with another non-native species is very risky.
Yeah, so biological controls are a very heavily regulated process because we have had issues in the past where people just brought in whatever. It's like, oh, it worked over here. We might as well bring it over here and have it work out. And then, yeah, it works great at controlling, but then that biological control becomes invasive.
Yeah.
I think maybe cane toads at one point were a biological control as well, and they are now an issue. So because of those reasons, it's very heavily regulated, and they try to find native sources first before they bring in these non-natives for biological control. And then there has to be a lot of studies regarding this. Is it likely to become an issue? Can it survive? Like if it was brought up into New England, would we have to keep reintroducing it? Would it survive our winter and be able to reproduce, or would we have to consistently add more to the environment to try and control this issue? So when we're talking about biological controls, there's a lot that we have to consider before we can even make it an option.
There's another question, Tayler, and that would be for you. Have you been able to control Phragmites? It seems to be really out of control everywhere.
Yes, so Phragmites is one of the ones that is really hard to control. It's best to control it when it's a very small stand. And there are a couple ways of controlling Phragmites. One of the main ones is to cut it right below the water surface. That way you're kind of inundating it with water or drowning it with water, but you have to keep that up, and it would take a long time to control it that way. Some people also use smothering tarps. So you'll cut it down below water level, and then you'll cover it with a tarp. And usually it'll be a black tarp, so we'll actually start increasing the temperature in that area and try and basically cook the Phragmites. Now that one's also, it takes a really long time for that to work. And then you have herbicides and everything. Once the stand is very large, it's hard to get because they do create tubers, and they're able to kind of just avoid any physical barriers that you may create, or they also spread via seeds, so they'll just kind of disperse that into the water column. And then especially once you're dealing with an area as long as Quabbin, trying to take care of Phragmites at that point, it might just be a cost benefit analysis. Is can we manage these large stands, or do we have to really focus on some of these new small pockets that we know that we can get rid of first and kind of work your way backwards? So it is a very difficult one to manage for. It has been done, but it really depends on the size of your property, the size of the population, and how much time and money you have in order to control it.
There's two more questions. One is, AIS is present in Hardwick Pond, which is approximately 2 miles from Quabbin Reservoir. The AIS could easily be transported to Quabbin via birds, etc. Who should the pond association contact for review assistance? And there's a second question that says, who should we contact to arrange a presentation to our pond association? So I would say that the contact is us. So you can email me or Tayler or both of us, and we can get the conversation going. Mm-hmm. On the other part of the question, I'll leave it up to you, Tayler. You know Hardwick Pond better than I do, so.
Yeah, I haven't been to Hardwick Pond yet. I believe it's on my list for going to this upcoming season. I can double check that real quick. Let's see. Probably should have had this open.
While you're doing that, Tayler, and we can come back to this presentation.
Yeah, I'll come back to that one.
Yeah. So presentation, this question. there's a second, another question that says, do you use volunteers to help pull, destroy invasive plants? We do not use volunteers to do the pulling or destroying our invasive species, just because it's difficult to get to some of our areas. And as of right now, we're relying more on contractors to do so, unless it's something that we can handle ourselves, like Tayelor and I going out to hand pull some species. That is a conversation that we've had, and we're not sure if we will ever use volunteers, but as of right now, we do not use any volunteers. We're mainly relying on contractors to do the work.
Okay.
Do you want me to repeat that question about Hardwick Pond?
Oh, yeah. I just found it. Yeah, so the question was, there's AIS present in Hardwick, let's see, approximately 2 miles from the Quabbin Reservoir, could easily be transported via birds. Who should they contact? So I guess going back to that one, I would say send Shasten and I an email with more information. So what AIS are present, I guess who, like, is it, like you said that there's a pond association. Do you know who owns the pond? Is it the town? Is it the city? So just information that way. Who should we be talking to? Yeah, so just kind of general information about that, and we can get the conversation going and talk a little bit more. As far as arranging a presentation to the pond association, I would say maybe go through Lisa.
A presentation.
Well, to get permission to do a presentation.
Well, they can contact us, and then we can.
Yeah, so I guess contact the visitor center, and we could probably get the conversation going about trying to give a presentation. Yeah. That would be good. And then Hardwick Pond is on my list for going to this year. So we'll see how that goes, but maybe we'll see each other there. Okay, and then as far as the volunteer question, as of right now, we don't use volunteers because, like Shasten said, it can be hard to identify. I think if there was a large area that was maybe like it was a pond association that needed help or something, then we could try and rally volunteers to help that way. But as of right now, for DCR properties, and I think also for just like safety and being covered by insurance and all that, we don't utilize volunteers right now. All right, I don't see any other questions rolling in.
No, I think that's it. Are there any more questions?
I think that all looks like it about does it. Did one more come in actually?
Oh yeah.
Oh, there's a comment. You're welcome, Suzanne.
You're welcome.
Yeah, appreciate it, Shasten and Tayelor. Great presentation, very informative, and appreciate all the questions and dialogue at the end. It's great.
Thank you. It's been
So
great.
this will conclude the Saturday program.